Sitting here with Ryan Ackerman, Project Administrator for the SRJB. Ryan, you gave the board in your comments today what was kind of some good news or some encouraging news about a federal partner. Can you go into what you're hearing from the Corps of Engineers and what we're learning about maybe some future money?
Sure. So right now we're about 6 to 8 months into a 3-year process, and it seems like every day that we move forward into that feasibility study process, we start to learn a little bit more about the potential for a federal project. Some of the preliminary findings are that we think that we're going to be close on a potential benefit cost ratio of something greater than 1 for a project in central Minot. Which is really encouraging. I mean, that would potentially deliver significant federal funding to complete flood control. But you know, our optimism is a little bit guarded in that we do have to overcome a couple of fairly significant milestones after that, and those milestones happen in Congress in Washington. So we'll need to get authorization from Congress in the form of a WRDA bill. Additionally, following that, we'll need to get an appropriation from Congress, likely in another WRDA bill. So we do have several more hurdles to overcome before we have significant federal funding that comes to the basin, but thus far the results of the feasibility study are encouraging. Okay.
Obviously, we're 6 to 8 months into a 3-year process on the feasibility study. The next steps in terms of the congressional appropriations, the federal appropriations, based on, and knowing that this is all flexible and moving around, based on your forecast of a future timeline, if there is federal money in Minot's future, what would be a guess? I mean, what in terms of our expectations?
Okay, so the feasibility study is anticipated to be complete by April of 2019. After that, then we have to get those 2 congressional milestones achieved. So after that, we would have to get authorization in the form of a WRDA bill. Those have historically been passed about every 2 years. However, the more recent cutbacks in terms of like federal spending have delayed WRDA legislation. In fact, between 2007 and 2014, there were no WRDA bills. So it took 7 years to actually pass a WRDA bill between 7 and 14. It sounds like Congress is going to get back on that 2-year cycle. So if our feasibility study is done in 2019, there would be a chance that we would get authorization maybe in 2020, and depending on the benefit cost ratio, if we're relatively high, we'd probably get an appropriation maybe in a subsequent WRDA bill, maybe around 2022 or so. But again, those are all dates are all subject to action of the federal government, and also subject to what the findings of the feasibility study are. So there are a lot of different variables in play there.
Gotcha. So we're doing everything we can from a federal perspective to keep the project moving and seeking that federal partner. On the more immediate time frame, we're looking for an appropriation from the North Dakota legislature to keep the project moving. Can you talk a little bit about what we're asking for, what we need in terms of the immediate future and requirements to keep the project rolling?
Sure. So our request to the state of North Dakota and into the Water Commission was for $127 million, and that includes construction funding for phases 1, 2, and 3. Additionally, construction funding for the Burlington levee system and some other phases, as well as the Northeast tieback levee, etc. Additionally, significant funding in there to continue design and acquisitions to keep that project momentum moving forward for future biennia. So that was the basis of our request. However, based on the revenue forecast, that request has been trimmed back. The executive budget prepared by former Governor Dalrymple includes $70 million for the project, and that's really what the legislature is currently working with as a baseline, and the legislative process will determine exactly where we end up being there. So we're certainly advocating for something more than $70 million, but with a $70 million appropriation for the project, we would be able to complete the construction of phases 1, 2, and 3, and also continue at least a modest amount of acquisitions.
Okay.
But design would basically come to a halt.
The 70 million to a certain degree, then if we get that, there there very likely is a bit of a slowdown in the design and aspects of the project.
Yeah, and certainly that, you know, the tangible progress that the public notices is in the form of construction. Okay, so what will happen likely is that after phases 1, 2, and 3 are built, that there will be a lull in construction activities until the design of those next phases can be completed, and then we can get funding to build them. So.
For those of us, as a little bit of a follow-up to all that, for those of us out here in the regular public, what can we be doing? Is there support we can be giving in terms of helping make Minot's case to get a full appropriation?
Well, I think telling the story helps. I think people can tell their story to our local legislators. Our local legislators are always willing to listen, at least in my experience. So I think contacting their legislators and making the case, telling their story about the flood damages that have been sustained by people, as well as the implications of, you know, future high-risk flood insurance. These are the 2011 flood was a huge economic disaster. And the implications economically of high-risk flood insurance are another disaster that's going to basically compound the recovery for our residents. So I think people reaching out to the legislators, telling those stories, those types of stories, it always helps.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.